Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, dear colleagues. It's actually the second time that I'm here. 2011 was the first time to be here. And yesterday I've learned that there are some efforts ongoing to demolish this paradise that we have learned it is and what it is still, so to my impression. When we terminated, at least in part, the collective agreement we have with the employers in the communal hospital with the end of last year. Of course, we did some preparation. I'm a surgeon, so it's easier for me if there is only one button. The first collective agreement in modern times that we had was established in 2006. The Marburger Bund has been founded in 1947. The name comes from the city of Marburg, where this first General Assembly took place. And for many years, for decades, we more or less voluntarily were together with other unions for our agreements. And in the mid of the 2000s, we were so unsatisfied and unpleased with the situation that we decided that it's better if we took care of our own stuff ourselves. So this was the reason why in 2006 we had our first new time collective agreement, and at that time we thought that we have fixed almost everything for the future. But we needed to learn 13 years later that the world has changed. Of course, the workload has increased a lot, the speed of work has increased, also the demand, especially of the younger colleagues, how their workplaces should be configured, what they want to have for, not only living for work, but also participating in the society, in their families, and every other thing outside of the job. This has changed dramatically, and there is about 25% of the colleagues, meanwhile, working on part-time. So this tells us that they have found an individual solution. Yesterday there was many talks about job size. If there are so many colleagues working on part-time, that means that the job size described by the collective agreement is obviously inappropriate. And we had many time and took many time to discuss this. So the bargaining committee I am the chair of had within 3 years more than 36 meeting days to develop a concept how this new collective agreement should basically look like. We discussed it with our membership in symposia. The last one was in October 2018, held on federal level. And we had more time than we wanted to have because the situation we are acting in got a little bit complicated. We spent years and much of efforts and money, of course, to prevent our parliament, the German Bundestag, from passing a bill which is in German called Tarifeinheitsgesetz, and that's difficult to explain because the original purpose simply had to do with the idea that industrial actions need to be reduced, especially from small professional groups and unions, pilots, air traffic controllers, train drivers, which can block the whole country, of course. And on the other hand, there was no political majority to work with this labor or industrial action acts themselves, and so they found a kind of bypass with a regulation that within one company, whatever that may be then, only the union which represents the majority of the employees is the one that may negotiate. It doesn't work because, for instance, in air traffic control, which is organized as a company, the only employees are air traffic controllers, and of course they are the majority. And we, as the doctors, were a kind of side effect of this law. They always told us, you are not meant, you are not the aim of what we are doing. But for us, since doctors always are a minority in a hospital, it was a very difficult situation. The funny thing is that nurses are often so badly organized that in absolute numbers in a hospital there are more doctors, a union member, than nurses are. So when this law came into power, we went to the Federal Constitutional Court, and finally there was a verdict. So we won in part, because they said that the law is compatible with the basic law, but the lawgiver must not generally disadvantage the small professional unions and cannot deprive them from their right to strike. The theory behind this is that for clarifying the question which collective agreement is the one that takes and which is the one that will be overruled, you need to have both of them, and they need to be established under the equal circumstances. That means also the minority trade union has the right to go on strike to come to this collective agreement. So the original idea to have some law passed which simply provides that strikes are going on, or prohibits that strikes are going on, sorry for that, did not work and does not work up to now. So finally, this collective bargaining committee I'm chairing had three key demands. The first and most important one, because it's the key for everything almost, is the recording of working time. Needs to be free of manipulation, which is the case in many hospitals, because nobody wants to be cheated at the time clock. And that there should not be a reduction of the salary during the statutory rest period. We have that funny situation that during the time of a statutory rest period, you are granted time off. That means they take the money you have earned in the night before to pay your off time on the next day. This is strange, but this is due to a verdict of the Federal Labor Court many years ago. And thirdly, we wanted to have a minimum of 2 free weeks and weekends per month, because, as I already said, especially the younger colleagues have the demand to participate in the society as well. So, on the 15th of September last year, the Greater Bargaining Committee that we have above our committee, where I am the chair of, decided not to completely terminate the agreement we had, but only to terminate this in part, as far as the extension of work by on-call on-site was concerned, and as the remuneration was concerned. So basically money and time were in the focus. We did not want to terminate the collective agreement in total, to be sure that we have still the coverage of an existing and persisting collective agreement, and not to find ourselves in the role of the minority union, which eventually must not even have a seat on the table. And then you see all these dates when we were negotiating from January to May, when we in a first step had an agreement which was then adopted by Marburger Bund. And how did we come there? First, this is the question of campaigning. The most important instrument you see on the left, the mobile phone. We established a messenger service on WhatsApp. Now we need to move to other providers because it's not longer not longer possible to do it on WhatsApp for certain reasons. And then there is the theory that you need, of course, to make the public your ally and the patients your supporters. You need to try to have the media on your side, and you need to provide good arguments. This is also what you do and did yesterday. But in reality, it's a kind of battle, and you do not win with convincing arguments. Finally, you win by showing strength and power. And there are a few more obstacles, like your own members. This guy is St. Joseph of Arimathea. He's not on the slide because, by legend, he brought the Holy Grail to Glastonbury in England, or is the ancestor of King Arthur, as others said, but I'm not sure how familiar you are with the Gospel of John. The important point in his description is occultus autem propter metrum. He was a disciple of Jesus, though a secret one, because of his fear. And the common member is not very brave. It clenches the fist in the pocket, but is not brave enough to take it out and show it. So you need to find something to encourage the common member. And the other thing is strategy. This man is Helmut von Moltke, which was the chief of the general staff in the 19th century in the Kingdom of Prussia. And he originally said this sentence, which is often thought that it's from Napoleon Bonaparte or General von Clausewitz, that no plan of operation can go far beyond the first encounter with the enemy's main force. So whatever you plan, whether you can act how you have planned or not, you can't be sure in advance. So in present, this means that the bait needs to take the fish and not the fisherman. So all that work we did in our committee, we were sure about it's the right thing, but of course the real proof, whether the membership in general wants to have what we had thought they will have or will want to have or not, there is a certain uncertainty, of course. And something you can very much rely on is that the employer will provide the best argument to mobilize your own members, because most of the times, fortunately, they are stupid enough to say some things which makes doctors very angry when it comes to negotiations. And there's another Roman quote you may know, si vis pacem parabellum, that means prepare the war if you want to achieve the peace. Industrial action must always be the ultima ratio, so the last step you take, and the first blow has to sit. And if it comes to the situation that you need to really go on strike, you need to be sure that you cut the earnings, not the expenses of the hospital. Otherwise, they are happy that you are on strike because they save money. And this is the situation where it came to the proof in Frankfurt. And as you see, we were very successful, also to the surprise of the employers. It helped a lot to have 5,000 colleagues to have on the main place in Frankfurt, the Römerberg. So what were our demands? First of all, we wanted to have a written agreement for ruling out this law, because one of the funny things in the verdict of the Federal Constitutive Court was also that they said all parties involved in a company, the employer and all the unions, can agree that this law I talked about earlier is simply not to be applied. A little strange situation, but very helpful. And what we further wanted to have, that these communal employers, which are not only responsible for their hospitals, but in many cases also for the public health authorities, that they should continue the negotiations we have ongoing with them for years concerning these colleagues which work in these public health authorities, because they consider them only as administrative staff or personnel and not really as doctors, and pay them much worse than they pay hospital doctors, which of course, and as you can imagine, is not very much in favor of these authorities. They simply have enormous problems to recruit adequate personnel in a first step, and they will collapse later or earlier simply because they are running out of staff. And the result was that we got, of course, this written agreement to rule out the law on the one hand, and was as far as the public health authorities are concerned, that the negotiations have to be continued after the 30th of October. You see, there's a date which is already in the past. Nothing has happened meanwhile. Why, I will explain later on. And there were a few demands of the employers, of course, concerning personal leasing and net wage optimization. We agreed with them that this can eventually be regulated on state level by Marburger Bund organizations on state level, and especially net wage optimization is not of any advantage for a doctor, because the income level is so high that doctors don't gain any profit. And for me, it's always like glass beads you give to natives and tell them that this is a valuable present. For us, it's not, and probably we will never have an agreement on that. The most important thing, as I told you, is the recording of working time. And we said we wanted, because this is the situation, the legal situation, the legal framework, that we could have this demand only as a precondition for being on call on site, that the entire presence on the workplace should be recorded as working time, and it may not be retrospectively capped or deducted for any reason, and the time recording, of course, needs to be at the door of the hospital and not elsewhere. The key point is that it should be free of any manipulation. Whether it's licensed by our organization or not is not so much in the focus any longer. And of course, we wanted that this is applicable for everything and not only as a precondition for being on call on site. And we got basically what we wanted to have, and of course also that is this recording is to cover everything. And one of the key points is, here is the laser probably, where do I show this? That the valuation afterwards, that it has not been real working time, needs to be proved by the employer. And you know that who one has the obligation of the proof is always the one with the disadvantage. So basically this is a regulation where we want to determine the situation that often the time we have been in the hospital is later on said that it simply doesn't count for payment. There are a few more regulations, but I do not need to specify them too much, I think. And, one too much. The other key topic was the free weekends. I said we wanted to have 2 free weekends per month, and of course we had an imagination what a weekend is from Friday evening to Monday morning. What we ended up with is a regulation that in general grants 2 weekends, but says certain is only 1 per month. If patient safety, for example, is at risk, it may the other one may shift it to the next calendar half year, but the big end is coming then because a further transfer to another period of time is not allowed. So if you don't do it in the first half of the year 2020, you will definitely have a problem in the second half of 2020. And the definition of the weekend now is from Friday in the late evening to Monday in the very early morning. One of the questions we couldn't clarify is whether weekends which are within a sick leave, a holiday, or something else, and free for this reason, need to be counted in the number of the free weekends which are covered by this regulation or not. And I'll come to this point later on. If you read all this with all these exemptions, it's like a speed limit where you have another regulation that everybody who needs to drive faster can do so. But there are few measurements again, for instance, that we have to fill in applications for transferring weekends from one calendar half year to the other. Of course, we must do this, but we do so much of paperwork as doctors that simply filling this paper wouldn't be a problem at all. And then you need to know that when we finish or agree on finishing the negotiations, this is only corner points. And then we have an additional step, a kind of editorial negotiation to come to a definitive contract. And I told you we finished in May, and this additional negotiation were in August. And the question was, what happened meanwhile? Why was there no progress? The employers had a lot of problems. For instance, the suspension of both the CEO and the chief negotiator, so there was simply no one we could talk to. And then they had made in these corner points a big mistake, because they had written that the option to arrange time off in lieu will be deleted, which is a great thing, because that problem that you get free time during, you need to pay for, of course, during your statutory rest period, then would have been solved. But then 2 months later, they said, oh, that's a mistake. All the data where they should have said their complaints had passed, and 2 or 3 months later they said a mistake, but you need to revise this, otherwise we don't talk to you, as a kind of precondition for every other thing. And then, as I told you, there was the question with the weekends, which are free for other reasons. Negotiation, as I said, was in August, and then they wanted to reassemble us in the late September with the whole bargaining or negotiation committee. And then finally we decided not to go there, not to show up, and to terminate this before what we finally did. And we have no agreement on this weekend question. The employer still says they want to count every week, and we say within our rule that we have set up for the free weekends, those ones which are caused by sick leave, by maternity leave, by holiday, must not be counted. The interesting thing is that in a similar case, the Federal Administrative Court has the same position than we have. So we are very confident that if it goes to court with our regulation, that we will succeed. You never know, but it's likely, at least. Another thing to be regulated there was the question when you move from normal work to being on shift service, how many days in between need to be. And we had a very complicated scheme for that. I don't show you. The result was that there is, in general, a 3 hours gap where there may neither be working on shifts nor on call on site. Or off-site if you switch from one to the other. Another important thing is the question how early you know about your roster. It's not very funny if you have, like today, the end of November, and will, for instance, be provided tomorrow the roster for December. So we said it needs to be published at least 6 weeks in advance, and if it does not, there needs to be paid extra money. The regulation now foresees that it's published 1 month in advance. If it is not, then there is an additional pay of 10% for all the duties, and if the change occurs less than 3 days before the single duties to be done, then there is an additional 10% pay. The other thing was that to be on call on site, we said must be limited to 4 times a month, at least in average. The best thing would be in every month, because we often have the situation that colleagues have these on-calls 6 times, 8 times a month. This means twice a week, and this is not very agreeing with your family life, your society life, and so on. And not to be cheated, we said that the length of the on-call is irrelevant for this counting. What we ended up is also with an average per half year, and that this means in the corner point that of course there is an exemption, so there should be an additional pay for the 25th to 30th on-call within a calendar half year. The question with the free weekends plays a role in here as well, because if I have a calendar half year, that means 26 weeks, and you are on holiday for 3 weeks, then of course you must divide these 24 duties you have to have by 26 and multiplied with 23, so it's a little less than 24 duties you have to do then before you are crossing the border. In the final contract, we have now a regulation, because the employers wanted to have it regulated in a different paragraph, which is even more an advantage for us, because in every single month it's looked whether there is a fifth or fourth on call on site, and for each one there is an additional 10% of supplementary pay. And as I said, the length of the on-call is irrelevant, except one thing, that if there is a 24 duty on weekends and colleagues decide by their own that they want to divide this in 2 parts of 12 hours each, and 2 different colleagues do this, then this only counts half. Then there are so-called sandwich duties, which has always been debated between us and the employer, whether it's in according with the collective agreement or not, to have after the on-call on site another time of regular work or not. Our exegesis interpretation was always is not allowed. Now we have a maximum of 1 hour, but this shortens the time of regular work before the on-call on site time. And of course, it's collective agreements are also dealing with the question, how much money do you earn finally? You never achieve what you want. We asked for 5% for 12 months. We got for a 33 months period a total increase of 6.5%. So this is in 3 steps, and it applies also to the remuneration of the on-call on site, which our idea was should base on the individual hourly pay. It still is based on a separate scheme with different figures. And then, as I said, we have this problem with the compensatory or statutory rest period where you are granted time off in lieu. So this means that you basically pay for the need to be off. We ask for a 50% supplement to more or less cover this, because the other thing, simply abolishing that, did not work, and we couldn't demand for that due to the legal framework. This is, Ian yesterday quoted a little bit mathematics. This is how I tried to explain to the negotiation committee what we finally did. It's not needed that everybody understands this. This is the written form what we do. There was a supplement of 5% for the 97th and further hour of being on call on site. Probably nobody reaches this within a month, so this could be abolished. And we have a 15% supplement on everything, and the valuation of this on call is increased in a second step. So this compensates quite much the loss you have during this time off. You pay, you need to be off, and you pay with your own money for. And as far as the arrangement of time off in lieu is concerned, the employer from now on may arrange this during the statutory rest period, but not to any other time without consent or approval of the employee. So that means that you basically either receive the money or take the time off at a day you want, and not the employer wants to have you off. And it's basically what we have done. So thank you for listening, and if there is any question I can answer, I will try to do so.